Hi everyone, it's Jeanette here from the Sewing Studio. Welcome to another tutorial, which today is going to be a really fun one. This is the sort of sewing I do when I need to do a bit of sewing, but I don't want to think about things a little bit too much. So if I'm sort of slightly mentally fatigued or something. So what we're going to be doing is some scrap string blocks. So this is one I've made before, just with my scraps, and I use this as a little mat that I sit my sewing machine on, as everything's gone flying. When I go to retreats or workshops or just to my sewing group, I take this and it goes under my sewing machine. So you can just have a look. I will just talk a little bit now about the quilting pattern, so I don't forget by the time it comes to the end. I've actually been playing around. I've got an embroidery machine and I've got a couple of quilting designs that I've bought to go on that. And so I've just been practicing on little things like this. So this was actually quilted on my embroidery machine. So if I just flip it over, you might be able to see the pattern a little bit. So it's just these really nice swirls. Actually, if I move that out of the way, let's just see if we can get a little bit of a close-up. A little bit of a close-up on that. So I've just used a sort of a goldy coloured thread on here, which just sort of seemed to blend in with all the colours on that. So just another little idea, and it's just something I'm having a practice with and getting used to on small things, not really on any sort of big quilts or anything. So anyway, that's the idea. Now, a few tutorials ago, I was working with a scrap bag, and this is the scrap bag I was working with. It's, I think it's called Buttercup and Slate by Corey Yoder from Coriander Quilts. And I was using this to make 6-inch curvy log cabin blocks with the Creative Grids trim tool, 6-inch trim tool, which I got from here. And at the time, I was cutting pieces like this off, which were left over from cutting the strips for the trim tool. And I thought, okay, I've got an idea for those. And this was the idea I was thinking of. So I've not thrown those away. So I've got a few little strips here, which were left over from using that scrap bag. And we have lots of different scrap bags here to choose from with all sorts of different fabrics. So if these colours aren't your thing, there's lots of other ones to choose from. So I thought, right, I'm going to do something with those. I'm not going to ditch that fabric because, we're all much more sustainably, think about sustainability, I suppose, a lot more these days. So it's, use every bit we can. And that sort of goes with my sort of mentality of quilting with all my scraps and bits and pieces as well. So this is the block that I've made. So what you're going to need for this are some fabric strips. And the fabric strips can be different widths. They can be the same width. It's whatever you've got at hand, really. So just your fabric strips, either a glue pen or just some pins. And then the other thing I use are 5-inch squares. We're doing these at 5 inches, so it finishes at 4.5. And these I've just cut from an old telephone directory. Now, we don't get a lot of telephone directories anymore, but that's what I sort of saved my telephone directory paper from. And that was actually a tip I got many, many years ago from Bonnie Hunter, and she said telephone directory paper is ideal for this, and it is. If you haven't got any telephone directory paper, you can use just ordinary printer paper, but I would say the cheaper the better. You don't want to go for your quality stuff. You want paper that's a bit thinner that can tear away easily, or you can, of course, get papers that are sort of ready-made for foundation piecing, which is, in effect, what we're using this for. So you can see there on the back. So all I do is get my ruler and I cut up some 5-inch squares, and you can do multiple layers at a time of these. And then that's what we're going to cover. Now, if you notice so I just can't pick up that one. Let's move those out of the way now because they're going to flap all over the place. On this one, I've started each of the blocks with a light coloured fabric down the centre. Now, that's your choice if you can do that or not. But I feel with this, you see a bit more of a pattern with that. And it gives a bit more lift to the blocks. So that's what I'm going to show you here today. So let's just move that one out of the way again. And let's go in here. So I've just got a variety of different strips here that you can see that I've cut the selvage off, and I'm left with all of these different strips. So the first one I want is a light coloured strip, and I think I've cut that 1.5 inches wide. Now, if that's a little bit too big, you can go narrower, but you've just got to think you've got to put 2 seams in this, and it's longer than the foundation paper. So we're just going to make sure we lay that one down, and I'm just going to check, because it's hard to see on this one which is the right side, but it's right side facing up, so I'm looking at the top of the fabric, and then I am just going to put a pin in that just to hold that for a minute. And then I've got some strips here. Now I tend to start with my longer strips first, and then you can have your smaller pieces which will go on the edges. So I've got a couple of strips here that I've decided to use. So let's go grey on that side, and then my green is going to go on the other side, so we can take those to the sewing machine. Okay, so I'm just going to take that pin that was underneath out, and I'm just going to put it on top where I can see it so I'm not running into it. Now, just a couple of things to say when you're stitching, because we're going to sew all the way through the paper. That, in effect, is acting as a stabiliser. Some people use interfacing or something like that, so you can sort of stitch onto anything. And your seam allowance can be anything. You just need to make sure you put a seam in it. I'm going to go for 1/4 inch-ish. So I'm just going to lower that, and I'm going to start off the paper and come in. Now, the other thing just to say as well is I've shortened my stitch length. I've actually gone down to a 1.8. So sort of a 1.8 or 1.5 sometimes I use. The smaller the stitch, the stronger the seam, but also it'll help perforate the paper so it tears away easily at the end. Now, I will also say I haven't put a special needle or anything in. This is just the needle that was on the machine, which is probably a universal one. I'm just going to finger press that back out the way for the moment. And then I'm going to add my green strip to the other side. And you just need to make sure you've got about 1/2 inch at least hanging off the edge of the fabric. And I'll show you in a minute why that's important. So we're just going to put that down and come in again. But this is really nice, easy sewing. As I said, if I want to do a bit of sewing but don't want to think too much about what I'm doing, this is the sort of thing I'll grab. So let's have a little look at what we've done. So I'm just going to open that out, and then I'm just going to get my little clover seam press. Now, you could take this to the iron. I tend to just sort of seam press it back, just save a bit of time and lots of trips to the iron. And then one important thing, I've opened those fabrics out before I trim. Let me just show you. So on the back here, you could leave that, but because I've got this tail which might get in the way, I think I'm just going to trim it back a bit. Now, it's important to open the fabric out before you do any trimming. If I trimmed now, you are likely to end up, when you fold that fabric back, probably on this side, there will be fabric that doesn't cover the whole of that paper. Now, there are a couple of things you can do about that if you find you're doing that. Either make your paper to begin with a little bit bigger to give yourself a little bit of flexibility, or really make sure your fabric is hanging off so you could have a different area you could select to trim back from. But ideally, you want to cover all the paper with the fabric. So if you are going to trim, open out the fabrics, and I just trim from the back, and I still give myself about 1/4 inch, but you can see I'm just going to trim some of this excess away, keep it nice and neat. It's probably more important this side where I've got this tail. So that bit I would put back into my pile. It won't be long enough obviously for a centre strip, but it might come for somewhere else. So this is really good at using up all those little bits of fabric. And then we would just carry on. So let's just do a couple more strips, and then I'll show you why I've got some triangles there. So I've got a light strip that's going to go that side, and a grey strip which looks like it's just going to be big enough that's going to go on that side. So I'm just going to sew one of those down, and then I'll fast forward to one that's almost covered and just show you what we do when we get to the corners. So then we're just going to open that out again, and I'm just going to give it another little crease with my seam roller. And you just keep going, so you can see there I'm almost at the corner. Now this is where, if you've been doing half square triangles, and if you've got any cut-offs, I mean, I wouldn't put that piece there because it's the wrong size, but you can see there, that's where a triangle would fit into those corners. So I quite often, if I'm trimming from half square triangles, will keep little triangle pieces like that. So let's just fast forward onto one that I've almost got done here. And I've covered the whole paper with strips. Now you can see here I've got a lot more strips because some of these are quite narrow. But I've just covered the whole paper. And then I think on this one, I was going to put that one there. So as you can see, there's a nice little triangle which will fit there. And then on this one, I'm going to put that little bit of fabric there. Now, one thing just to say, when you get to these very edges, is make sure you've got a fairly big piece to go there, because what you don't want is a seam sitting on top of a seam when you come to that corner. So you want to sort of make sure that you've got a big enough piece of fabric that that's not going to do that. So let's just put that one on there and put a pin in it. And that one's going to go there. Let's take that little. And then we can take that to the machine, sew those on, and then I'll show you how to do the final trim. And the other side. So that's those pieces put on. So I'm just going to finger press that back and just get my seam roller out on it. And the same with the other side. And you can see it's covered all the paper there. And then I'm just going to take that now to the iron and give it a final press before we do the trim. Let's get rid of all these loose bits of thread. And I'm going to just give it a press from the back as well. If you're doing that, just make sure you haven't got any paper where the ink or anything's going to come off. Till receipts, I think, are the worst there for when you add heat. I don't think it actually transfers any of it, but you can see all the black comes to the surface. So there it is. So we're just going to give it a final trim all the way round. Now, actually, I'm going to check whether I want to do that from the front or the back. So I'm trimming this to 5 inches. Which is the size of my paper. So actually I think I'm okay, because I'm just looking here. Let me just put that so you can get a zoom in on this, because I'm very close to the edge of paper there, but I've got a little bit excess over here, but I think we've covered that enough. So I'm just looking at my 5-inch line there, and just checking that I've got fabric underneath all the way around, and I have. So I'm actually going to trim from there. From there, and then I'm just going to, oh, that was a bit wonky. Let's just do that bit again. There we are. And then we're going to just whisk that around. And get my 5 inches lined up everywhere. So you can just see I was very close to the edge there, but we've got plenty, so that's okay. And then the last side. Now, if you've got a rotating cutting mat at home, this is ideal, or even just a smaller mat that you can turn. Show them a little bit on there. The edge there, I'm just making sure I'm all lined up. And there's the block, all trimmed. So they really start to come to life once you do that bit of trimming. So you can see there, we've got those 2 blocks, and how I've set them in this little quilt is like that. So let's just bring that one in. Let's move my mess out of the way. Now because I sort of do a few of these at a time, and I'm not always ready to do the final assembly, I leave the papers on until I'm ready to actually start to sew the blocks together. It just means that if you're moving them about, it just helps to keep all your fabrics all nice and sort of stable. So you can sort of see there, that one's gone like that, and that one's gone like that. But of course you can do them however you like. You could line them up so they're all facing in one direction. It's whatever, but I chose to do this where you get these sort of diamonds and crosses. Now for this, I made a total of 16 of these blocks. As I said, they started off 5 inches, they ended up 4.5, and it's just in a 4x4 grid, so it just works out. A nice little small mat. As I said, my little sewing machine just sits on that, and that just looks decorative, and it helps to sort of deaden the sound, and if I need to move the machine I can just sort of slide it around a bit more. I've just used a single dark navy fabric on the back, and then just put a little binding just as you would a small quilt. Now I will just show you, when you come to take the papers off, because you've got the stitch lines here, now sometimes what I do is just sort of scratch that with my fingernail, and it will just help release it. Now what I tend to do is just hold that seam. Let me just do that on a close-up so you can see it, and do the other side. So I'm just going to scrape that with my fingernail. You just hold that seam a little bit, and then you literally just get the paper, and it should just very easily just tear away. The same with this one. I might need just a little something just to get in under, because that's quite a narrow strip. And like I say, just hold the seam and just tear it away. If you do find any little bits like that, you can either just sort of go in with a little stiletto or a little pair of tweezers, but most of the little bits will come out, particularly for this paper, it's actually quite thin. So that's how you come to remove the papers. But as I said, I leave my papers on until I'm ready. So that's all there are to the blocks, and you can see I've almost got a third one, so actually making 16 will be really quick. Sort of goes without saying, you can make these any size. I just chose to do 5 inches for a finished 4.5, just for the size of this little mat that I wanted. But you can really upscale these blocks, do them at 8 inch, do them at 10 inch, do them at 12 inch. It really will depend on the size of your strips and what you've got. So I hope you give this a go. It really is quite good fun. It uses up all those little strips that we don't really know what else to do with. If you do give this a go, please share any photos with us. We'd love to see what you do with the ideas. And I hope you'll join me again here in the sewing studio.